Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Webster. I'm the founder, CEO, and CISO for Cyvergence. Today, we're going to cover a primer on the threat landscape, part 3. So the agenda, we're going to cover attractive threats, solutions, and Cyvergence services. So what are you going to learn today? We're going to take a slightly different view of rogue IT from what we've looked at in the past. We're going to cover how artificial intelligence affects the threat landscape. We're going to look at social media in the threat landscape and some solution for managing these problems. So the attractive threats. Before we get started though, I think it's important to kind of take a step back, and it's going to start to put things in focus to talk about this right off the bat. So the reality is that data is the new oil. Most companies today are thriving off of data. These includes a lot of these third-party applications and things like that. They're trying to pull in data from whatever sources they possibly can. A lot of times this is for advertising purposes or other purposes, but that data can get lost in other ways. So you can see here, and this is true in a lot of different industries. Data is the new oil. It's the phrase that's been around for several years now. But roughly, according to McKinsey, there is a $3 trillion value in just 7 industries across the globe. In the United States, I think there was $1.3 trillion of value that's going to be providing on a yearly basis. And in the US, we have roughly 500,000 big data jobs with a shortage of up to 190,000 jobs. So there is a lot of work going into big data these days. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details behind it in depth, but just know that this is some of the impetus for why things are going to be what we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about shadow IT. And sometimes you can call it rogue IT. There are other definitions. I'm not so hung up on the terminology, but there's a lot of free tools that are out there. And so these are things like local installations or executables, like different tools that are embedded in the operating systems when you purchase them. And a lot of these are meant for improvement purposes. But if they're doing some things, they could be doing some other things like gathering data about what you're working on. And a lot of these are for very good reasons. People want to do the right thing working for their company. And so these are people with positive intent that may cause some challenges for your organization down the road. Sometimes they're, trying to work with family things and they need to install something in order to see what their son or daughter is doing in some of the colleges or universities they're in. There's a lot of different options that are out there. But sometimes you get some people that are doing it for fun. They may not even realize that installing something with a software license on a local computer could be creating some licensing challenges for your organization. So this is just one of the approaches that needs to be thought about. And yes, occasionally you will find some malicious insiders that are trying to do something negative. But what are some of the risks? So obviously you have things like malware can be installed on it. But the reality is you've got unknown data going places. That's where some of the challenges comes in. So if you've got something that you're uploading data to or something that's looking at all the different parts of what you're writing, working on, you could have data compromises in ways that you may not even be aware of. It could be built into the software. So even if you read the legal agreements and understand what the legal risks are related to it, you may not really understand what's happening. Then what happens when the legalese changes over a period of time? That becomes a big challenge for organizations. They may be doing the right thing, but when you get the latest version of the software, you could be agreeing to something that you may not even be aware of as you're starting to work on it. So what this means is you may not even realize that you've got a breach within your organization or a breach as a result of some of that data. It could be going out to a piece of software. You could be putting something into the software that has a lot of data that's out there. There's authentication issues to go into, with it. So if you had your local tools, your local authentication tools, maybe that could prevent breaches. Maybe your local account could be compromised. Or authentication is part of it. Are they going to enforce strong security standards? In some cases, yes, some cases, no. But without taking a look at it, you can't make any assumptions today. A lot of times when they're developing these software, as I've talked about in other presentations in the past, there could be potential malware within that particular organization or within that set of tools or whatever it is you're downloading. So that's yet another part of it, especially if you're downloading a tool as opposed to something that's sitting there on the web. But you also don't know what kind of security controls are in place. So think about it. If you're uploading software or you're building something within an application online, you think, hey, this is free, I get to use it. Well, is it okay if that information is public? The answer in many cases is absolutely. I'm just doing some marketing and it's going to be seen by the whole world anyway, so who cares? But in other cases, this could be a larger risk. What if you're uploading sensitive data? What if you have client information that you're putting in on a website that you're just using? You might be using the corporate email, but it may have some sensitive data in it. And these are people, again, largely trying to do the right thing. So it's about training people about the risks of shadow IT. But let's go ahead and take a look. And this is where we get into the data brokers and why data is so valuable. So this is just coming in from a report from Consumer Reports that talked about some experiments they did from sharing some of the archived information within Facebook. So on average, each participant of the study had their data sent to 2,230 companies, with data going up to 7,000 companies sharing their data. 7,000 companies. So you have a piece of data, you think, hey, it's share with my friends. Oh, this is nice. It could be going to a lot of different websites that are out there. So think about that from a corporate perspective. If you have corporate data, now, in many cases, you have public information. It doesn't matter if it's on Facebook or it's on any of these different applications that are out there, but you really want this going into multiple companies. So you can see over here on the right-hand side, these are the top companies for the panelists that were there that the data was going to. Now, data brokers, if you're not familiar with the concept, they're essentially exactly what you think they are. They're gathering data from multiple sources in order to have that information, in order to resell that information to advertisers and others. It's just part of the economy today that a lot of people are not sitting down and thinking about, but ultimately this can, not saying that it will, but it can pose a risk to your organization. It just involves being thoughtful about what approach you're going to be taking related to data within your organization. So it was sort of interesting here, and one company appeared in 96% of the participants' data. This is LiveRamp, which is a data broker based in San Francisco. Obviously, there are others out there like Home Depot, Macy's, Walmart, were in the top 100 most frequently seen companies, according to this study. So this is sort of an interesting backdrop because it gives you an idea just how fluid data is. It's going all over the place. And do you have good relationships with all of those others? And you know that data is actually going to be safe if you decide to send it out there. From my perspective, you're sending out to whether it's 2,000 or 7,000 companies that the data is going to, not all of them are going to have the same level of security, but it's something to think about and educate your users on when you're considering a social media perspective. So let's take a look at these smart applications over here. So the images that we see off to the right-hand side, these are from DuckDuckGo. It's from my cell phone. And this is specifically related to LinkedIn. If we start with the one over on the left-hand side, you can see here that it went to more than 31 more different applications of what you're seeing here. You can see that it hit Facebook, it hit Amazon, and Facebook is not even installed on that computer. This is where LinkedIn is sending that data to. So DuckDuckGo has a lot of capabilities in terms of blocking that data. But you also see that it attempted to go to LinkedIn. But I decided to, well, let's take a look at Google. Let's see what information is going over to them. You can see here your local IP address, you get your postal code, the first name, last name is in there, email addresses, other types of unique identifiers, and a lot of information that it's sort of strange to see that data going off to another source. Now, DuckDuckGo does have the ability to block it, so I appreciate for what it is, but it does tell you that a lot of these smart applications are sending data all over the place. So it's good to think about it and how it's going to best protect your organization. And what does that mean for both the personal consumer? Sometimes we're just getting advertising data, but what about other data that's out there as well? Now, a lot of people always ask about health monitoring tools. Now, for those who are familiar with my book, it's on Do No Harm, Protecting Connected Medical Devices, Healthcare, and Data from Hackers and Adversarial Data States. So I do take up this conversation in a much larger conversation in my book, but just as a very general perspective, if you're talking about something from a hospital, from a healthcare organization, um, generally speaking, it's got a lot stronger regulations in terms of how it's protected. It is regulated by something called HIPAA, which is a Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. There's some more complications to it, but I don't want to go down that road too much in this. But in general, there are strict rules around sharing that data. That said, even though there are strict rules, there are anonymization requirements that can be put in. And big data has the ability to reconstitute the data and figure out, even if it's anonymized, who you are. So that data that you think is anonymized or may not be out there, big data can work its way around that. And that's one of the big things to note, that even from a healthcare perspective, that can create some challenges. Now, personal interest health is another thing. So this is like a company that's going to be like maybe an exercise, ring or a watch or something else, but this can come from any company. It doesn't have the HIPAA regulations. You might be getting blood pressure information both from one of these devices, or you might be getting it from the healthcare. The data might be exactly the same from what you're finding, but you don't have the HIPAA protection because it's not coming from a healthcare organization. So the amount of protection around PII, personally identifiable information, is much less for a lot of these devices. And that information could be sold to whoever. Now, this might be perfectly normal, it might be perfectly acceptable, but you've got to sit down and ask yourself, is this reasonable or is this not reasonable? And what are the challenges related to that? Just something else to consider. So no conversation about data is going to be complete without talking about artificial intelligence. To me, I look at artificial intelligence as an accelerator. It is moving things forward at a reasonably fast rate that we wouldn't have had before. So there's a lot of good that's coming from it. You're able to use it as an inspiration. Maybe you can write things that you wouldn't be able to write faster. Maybe you can find out some information or look up some sources on questions you have, and it'll cite it. Sometimes they're faster than search engines. It can write code for you. So people who are developers, software developers, can use this to accelerate what they're doing. So they're putting that data up within the system or having it create the development for you, so you don't have to do that work. Now, in theory, you should not be able to get around that, but there have been study after study showing that it can be circumvented and some negative things can happen. And so they can create some bad code that's going to be used to hack other people. And so for those who don't know how to code very well, it's going to help accelerate the speed and rate at which they're able to start to develop that code. So the other thing that should be taken into account, everything that I talked about in terms of the shadow IT risks is also applicable to AI. It's yet another attractive nuisance out there from a certain standpoint. It doesn't fit the legal definition of an attractive nuisance, but it's attractive. People want to use it. They want to accelerate what they're doing. They're going to put their data within these same artificial intelligence systems. And so if that data goes there, how well protected is it? Everything that I talked about previously is going to be also applicable to artificial intelligence. And so that's where some of the challenges come in. But the other side of the house is AI also does things like hallucinations. So these are things where it's going to be seeming to give you good information. It looks like it if you see it written and you don't know what you're talking about. It seems like it's very reasonable. And so when you're talking about a hallucination risk, you have to make sure that, in fact, more than one lawyer has been caught red-handed taking information from artificial intelligence, and it turns out that none of that information is true. It'll cite court cases that don't exist. That's a hallucination for you. So you've got to have at least a little bit of validation that the information that you're getting from artificial intelligence is true. And there are certain things that we'll talk about a little bit later when we get into some of the solutions to protect yourself from these types of artificial intelligence. But as a whole, though, you can start to see how AI can be just as sticky because it's getting so popular. It has developed such a large amount of popularity amongst the world today that it's changing things pretty drastically. But as I said, we're going to get back to data brokers. Now that we've also included artificial intelligence in that, it's pulling that information out. In many cases, it's sending that information off to data brokers like everything else. The value there is going to be around advertising in many cases. But in some cases, you're going to get into things like foreign governments. Should they have your data or should they not have your data? Because what happens is in these data brokers, they take that data and they sell it all over the world and they trade it with other companies who are also trading. So this data that you have is this constant stream that's moving and continually changing all the time. And in some cases, there are hostile foreign governments that are able to pull in that data. So let's take something as innocent as your location. So let's say you go and you're working for the NSA, for example, and you're in there 8 hours a day and it's reporting, oh, by the way, so-and-so works at the NSA because they're there 40 hours a week. And so you've got to say, do you want that information to be in the hands of a foreign national? That's a question that you've got to answer for each one of those agencies. It's definitely a concern that's out there when you're looking at the big picture. But there's a lot of risks too. Think about it from a personal standpoint. You know, this can start to create some challenges. So let's say somebody wants to stay anonymous for whatever reason. Maybe they're getting away from an ex-husband or being targeted by organized crime or some other things. But big data being what it is able to figure out who it is and then pulls that data and then resells that information to somebody else. Is that a good use of the data broker information? Um, Probably not in that case. Well, there's no laws in many cases where you're creating problems. All they've got to do is go look on some of these data brokers, pay a fee, get the information about where somebody is, and all of a sudden, everything they did to move to a new location can be problematic. So if you've got a stalker or something, these are huge risks that people have to face as a result of it. You might say, well, it's a small percentage of the population, there's some value there, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of these are creating a really negative situation for people to live in today. So it's how do you begin to manage risks? I mean, there are some calls to get data brokers regulated for the United States. The Europe is a little bit ahead of where the United States is from that standpoint, and there's a little bit stronger protections. But there are definitely some things that you can do. I talked a little bit about the personal level, the national level, the poor control. You may not have control of that information. So what if you have information about your company? Hey, this is coming in. Do you get your email address, as we saw, and then it's got your company email address, and then it knows that your company is working on specific information related to something that's going on. This can represent problems for your organization. What if you're dealing with a sensitive legal client and a lawyer puts something, they just want to rewrite it to make it look more professional? Because you can do things like assume the persona of a conservative lawyer, and then it will rewrite things from a legal standpoint to make sure that it sounds a little bit better than it would have before. And that will cut down the work that a lawyer needs to do. So that becomes a challenge, because what if you have that information going out there, then that enters into the artificial intelligence that has rewritten your document for you, and then that information goes out. It definitely creates some challenges. So that's another angle to think about from a data broker perspective. You may not have control of the data that you thought that you had control of. And of course, no conversation about artificial intelligence is going to be complete without talking about deep fakes. So for those who may not be familiar with deep fakes, these are things where it can seem like it's a real person. Like me just talking right now, somebody could record my voice, create a deep fake of it and make it sound like it's me, and call and make it sound like it's my voice and try to do something to manipulate my family. That's a real risk today. But it definitely makes things, easier. So we can also create a fake person. Like I'm up here, I'm moving my head around a little bit so they can get a video on that, so they can get a better profile of what I actually look like, and create a fake person that's going to be doing the talking for you. Make it my mannerisms in there, and it's going to be part of the whole thing. Now, sometimes what the attackers are going to do is create phone calls. Sometimes they're just curious and they're going to download software and just see what they're able to do. Other times they're going to mimic voice and video settings, such as in a virtual meeting. There was a company that lost $25 million because of a call over, I believe it was Zoom, but it was over one of the products that were out there, and had that information. They thought they had the right person, and they conducted a transaction because they thought they were talking to somebody important within the organization. So that's a big concern today. You've got to make sure that you've got the right controls in place, and deep fakes are costing the world a lot of money. Now, I think we're at the low end of where we're at. We have a long ways to go, but at least we're taking steps in the right direction, and we're at least being aware of the problem by talking about it today, as well as a lot of other articles that have been out for a long period of time. But artificial intelligence is part of that, because you're able to not only sound like somebody else, you're able to mimic them and create the whole style around the way somebody else would speak. To me, it's definitely concerning. So we'll talk a little bit about solutions today. I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time, but check your settings. You can look on the apps, and a lot of times they have settings where you are able to not send all that information out. You can do this for your television set. There are places you can reference to go pull it. You can do this for a lot of apps on your phone. DuckDuckGo is another option. You could see from what I saw, it was blocking a lot of the traffic from getting out that I didn't want to get out. Also, security awareness training. Do it for your organization. Talk to them about what the risks are. Determine what is the best strategy for the organization in terms of that security awareness training. Create security memos. Write something up and say, hey, here's an issue. Here's something to consider. Taking a look at your identity, making sure that you've got controls. You can actually sift through and find the rogue IT within your organization by sifting through the emails and trying to figure out what websites are they connecting into. A lot of times they're going to be using your company websites to be able to pull that information. So you may be uploading it to negative places. But, there's a lot of strategies that companies can take. For example, some companies decide to block websites and they say, if it's artificial intelligence, we're not going to allow it. But we're going to, in some cases, they actually purchase their own artificial intelligence to go within their company that people can use to start accelerating what they're doing. And that can be a win for companies because then they don't have as large of a risk to deal with when it comes to data escaping and data going to other places, but they're paying for an authorized corporate instance of the artificial intelligence that's up there. Another thing you can do is whitelisting. So whitelisting is a process where you say, I'm going to allow this executable or even the version of the executable to run on these systems and no other version. In that particular case, you're doing a good job because you're preventing these unauthorized applications. So if somebody downloads and tries to install something, you can block it by setting up the identity properly so you can't allow installations. But also, even if they do happen to get it installed for some way, you can't actually run it because you can't click on it to even run. So these are all win-win-win things that organizations can do. They take time, they take energy. You don't snap your fingers and get these things done, but it's built in as part of a process. When it comes to third-party apps as well, come up with a process to approve what that software intake process is and figure out what's the best way to integrate software within your organization. A lot of times these are business needs that people have, and they know that there are tools out there they can work with to make their jobs easier. So that's part of the processes. Now, when it comes to purchasing, like the example of the 25 million I just gave a minute ago, that's yet another process for how companies could handle things. So for example, they might say, hey, well, you need to validate it by more than one mechanism. So great, you had a meeting, there was a video meeting, you seem to get the right person. Did you validate that over another tangent? Now, it could be that let's say if you decide to send a Teams message or you text somebody on a personal phone or whatever, you might think, oh, okay, well, here's my extra level of validation. That is a much better way to go. The naysayers are going to say, well, yeah, but that can be compromised. Yes, it can be compromised. I'm aware that all these things are possible. But the more layers you put in, especially if you say, hey, if it's more than $1 million, make sure that you get validation prior to doing that purchase. So that's part of the process to take a look at. But these are just a few ideas. There's a lot of other options out there for our solutions. But that being said, we'll touch briefly on the Cyvergent services. There's a lot of things we can do. We do the virtual CISO work. If you need security awareness training, we can work with you on secure web gateways or DLP solutions and a bunch of others. But reach out and have a call. That's really what I'm interested in. Have a conversation. Find out what is going to be best for your organization. Figure out how we can help you. But that said, I want to thank you very much for your time today. Feel free to follow us on YouTube or LinkedIn is where I put a lot of the presentations that are out there. We also on X, Instagram, and Facebook. If you have any questions, feel free to visit our site at cyvergence.biz. And I want to thank you very much for listening to me today. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.